Saludos. This is Gabe Morales returning back for another episode on Mexican Mafia members over the last 60 years, A through Z. I think it went pretty good last time. Most people got the message. For those of you who have been respectful and submitted good questions, thank you for your support. Daryl Night Owl Baca was mentioned quite a bit by Boxer Enriquez. They were arch rivals, even though they're both from Arta. Night Owl has a C number, 35338, and has remained a member in good standing for many years. He was one of the individuals who put out the palabra pesada about the Mongols intruding into MA areas by recruiting Sureños, and stated that therefore they should be taxed just like any other Sureño gang. Of course, the Mongols didn't look at it like that, but did recruit a lot of Sureños during their expansion over recent years. Night Owl continues to be housed at Pelican Bay State Prison. Ruben Baca was from LA County. He may have been from Azusa. I'm not sure on that. But he did have an A number, a B number, and an H number, and was involved in several homicides over the years. He was born in 1943, and I show he is either no longer in custody or is deceased. Joseph Baez was from Orange County, and he was an MA member for at least a minute, but was caught up in that San Ojeda beef and was green-lighted. I show that he was hit in December 2010 and locked it up. Marcelo Gabi Baeza, a.k.a. Pistolero, was from Florencia. He was involved in the murder of a BGF member by the name of Alonzo Bell at San Quentin on August 30th, 1973. He was considered to be a warrior and was one of the original Mexican Mafia members back in 1958. He did a bank robbery in 1977, thus was sent to the feds. He did time at Lewisburg and was a member of the federal MA, and I understand one day just walked away, never debriefed, and was still alive last I checked. If so, he'll be 83 years old. Ronald Turtle Baiza was from Ontario Black Angels and had a C number when he was made an MA member. He was housed at the California Institution for Men with Boxer in the early 90s, and I had him at New Folsom at SEG unit in 1991. Ended up paroling in 92 and came back with a V number. I show he is no longer in custody. Roy Sonny Ballesteros was from Hazard, and the Ballesteros family was neighbors with my mentor, Robert Moco Morel, who also grew up in Hazard. Sonny was born in 1930 and had an A number. He was made an MA member in the early 60s, was housed at San Quentin Adjustment Center in the early 70s. He paroled in 1975 and ended up moving to Utah. I understand he was later arrested in Idaho and disappeared off the radar. Ronald Blackie Baltiera may have been from Pomona 12th Street. I'm not sure on that. I'll have to check with some of my Pomona contacts. But he had a B35501 number and was MA in the mid-1970s. Eusebio Peaches Banuelos was from a very old LA barrio called Clover and had a C number. I show he was validated as MA in the early 90s, ended up going to Corcoran, and is currently housed at Lancaster. Armando Barajas is also from Ontario Black Angels, which was a gang that was made famous via disgraced MA member Tupi Hernandez. Mondo picked up a C number and was sponsored by Tupi before he fell from grace. Mondo was housed at the San Bernardino County Jail in 2010, and for a minute, a lot of people that worked for Tupi were under investigation, but evidently, Mondo and several other Black Angels turned out to be good. Mondo caught a D number and then was sent to the feds, where he is currently still housed, and has been seen with several high-ranking MA members. He is scheduled to be released in 2029. Arturo Tortuga Barrera is from White Fence. As far as I know, he is the brother, Black Dan Barrera. Arturo was made MA in the mid-70s, shortly after Black Dan was made. Black Dan was a very dangerous individual. He killed Albert Pelon Gonzalez in 1978 in Whittier, and was involved in several other homicides attributed to the Mexican Mafia. He also stabbed a BGF member named Marcel Thomas in San Quentin in 1974, as well as killing another BGF member named Truman Nichols. Another BGF member named Alfred Harris was killed, and a BGF member, Zaibu Davis, was stabbed during this incident. Black Dan was caught on tape meeting with other Mexican Mafia members in a RICO case and sent to the feds, where he overdosed in January 2007 and was still held in high regard at the time of his death, as seen in this picture. I also am not sure, but there was a secretary for the MA named Jennifer Lynn Varela Vasquez, who had ties to Washington State. She was involved in a conspiracy at the LA County Jail that also involved Mara Salvatrucha. She was housed at Chalchella until recently, but I show was no longer in custody. There was Juan Barragan from Southside Los, who I show was Mexican Mafia in 2001. There was also Joseph Rebel Barende from El Hoyo Maravilla, who had a B number and was MA in the early 70s. He hit an NF member named Mike Nolan in December 1972 at San Quentin. I show that Rebel was killed in 1981 and MA was written on his car hood in blood. I'm not sure if that's a rumor or not. Alfonso Termite Barrientos was from Eastside Clover, and I show was a Mexican Mafia member in the Feds in the early 90s. He ended up being killed on April 29th, 2007. I don't have the complete story on that, so let me know if you have any details. David Popeye Boron Corona from Logan Heights, San Diego, I do have a lot of information on. He was a Mexican Mafia member who worked for the Ariano Felix organization and apparently had 16 skulls tattooed on him. He ended up being killed by friendly fire when Popeye and other MM members tried to take out a Tijuana Zetas newspaper editor named Jesus Blanco Nelas, who had been criticizing the Ariano Felix organization. Joel Daniel Batiste was from LA and had a B number and later on caught a V number. I show that he was MA in the mid-70s and committed a murder in Huntington Park in December 2001. I'm not sure what happened to him after that. David Moose Bazauri was an early MA member who was involved in the murder of Correctional Officer Connie Prock at DVI in 1963 in the Youth Authority wing. He committed this murder with Sleepy Betancourt, who I'll talk about here in just a minute. Robert Blanco Bibe may have been from Downey. I'm not sure on that. But I show he caught a J number and was involved in attempted murder in the year 2000, was made MA. I believe he was at Ironwood State Prison in 2012, but I show is no longer in custody. Farrell Beltran was from Redlands. He also had a J number and hit CDC around 1994. He ended up being a Cardinal, was housed at Lancaster from 2016 to 2021, and has been housed at Solano for the last couple of years. Ernesto Benavides was from Santa Clara. He had a B number and was MA by 1974, but I show locked it up around 1976. Raul Jr. Barianga was from Mission Hills and also had ties to Washington State. I show that he was made MA in the late 70s in the Feds. Fernando Bermudez was from Paramount Dogpatch. He had a B number and was known as being a very good artist. He was made in the late 70s and did a lot of time at Pelican Bay, as well as some time at New Folsom State Prison where I worked. He died in February 2017, still in good standings. Guillermo Willie Boy Bermudez was from Colton. I understand that he murdered a Texas Syndicate Nuestra Familia associate named Corny Carrasco in December 1975 at San Quentin. This is at a time when the Texas Syndicate was split between supporting the Mexican Mafia and supporting the Nuestra Familia. Carrasco ended up supporting the NF while he was in MA territory. I showed that Willie Boy dropped out in the early 1980s. Roberto World Bernal had a B number and was MA in the mid-1970s. I understand that he owned a bar in East LA and also was involved in a dope house. He was born in 1932, so I believe is now deceased. Richard Berry was born in 1943 and may be Roland Berry's younger brother. I do know that Rolo had ties to Watts Vario Grape as well as Fontana. He caught a B number and was made MA in the late 1970s. He did a bank robbery and was sent to the Feds. Did time at Lompoc with Champ and the boys, and was released in 1996. He then ended up catching a T number, and due to his seniority, held a lot of clout. Now, I know that some of you guys asked about Roland Berry and other heavyweights, but I don't have enough time in this episode to get into each and every individual's criminal career, but I do plan on doing some solo episodes in the future. So after I'm done with all the prison gangs A through Z, I'll take note of how many people requested solo profiles and see what I can come up with on those. I appreciate your patience and continued support. Doroteo Sleepy Betancourt claimed Maravilla and Calexico. He was involved in multiple murders and was, until recently, the oldest active Mexican Mafia member. He joined around 1962 and, like I said, with Moose Bazur, was involved in the homicide of CO Connie Prock in 1963 at DBI. He was also involved in the murder of Bullwinkle Medina at the California Correctional Center, which he carried out with the assistance of Pelum Moreno. He did some time at Old Folsom in the 1970s and is 80 years old, being housed at a California health facility in Stockton, California. Jose Payaso Betancourt may be related to Sleepy. I show he is from Mariana Maravilla and caught a T number. He was convicted of murder, sent to San Quentin's death row, but won his appeal and then was kicked out to Pelican Bay Shoot. He did some time at New Folsom State Prison, and it is interesting that instead of having a mafioso tap, he has a marafioso tap. Art Conejo Blajos, Aztec codename Tochin, is from Primera Flats. He was involved in the murder of Gilbert Ruiz in October 1979 at the LA County Jail. Not too long after that, Conejo picked up the Bible and joined Victory Outreach with several other MA members who had clout. One thing I got to say about the MA is usually it is blood in, blood out. Not always. There are exceptions to how you can get in and exceptions to how you can get out. And apparently, if you turn Christian and are a legitimate Christian, not a hypocrite, don't use or sell drugs, and don't get involved in MA politics or debrief, they will let you live. Evaristo Blanco was from Chiques and had a B number. He was made an MA member at the Chino Institution for Men. He paroled in 1974, ended up committing a murder in November 1976, whereby the victim was held by Chavo Perez, Mongo Silva, and Evaristo ended up shooting Victor Mazan from South LA for refusing to do a hit on Luis Araujo. The individual I mentioned was an MA member, but later supported the Nuestra Familia. Otis Booker, a.k.a. Gringo, was another MA hitman I had at New Folsom Prison in the 1990s. I show he was at Ironwood State Prison in 2012, but is no longer in custody. Daniel Speedy Borcamonte may be from Pomona 12th Street. I'm not sure about that. But he was an MA member made in the mid-1970s and may have been housed at Kern County Jail in 1975. I'm not sure about that. He may have been kicked out to San Quentin. If you know anything about Speedy, let me know. But I believe he was related to Manuel Huayno Brocamonte, who had an address in Chino. So it's very possible they may have been cousins. Huayno was an MA member in the 1970s up until at least 2014. He pulled several bank robberies and also did time in the federal system. Hector Briseño was an MA member from LA who had an H number. He did a homicide in 1993 and was sent to the Youth Authority, then kicked out where he acquired an H number. I show he was at Tehachapi in 2012, but is no longer in custody. Ramon Chubbs Brizuela is from El Sereno, the same barrio that Indio Carlos is from, an individual I also had at the New Folsom Violence Control Unit. Chubbs was a shot caller at the LA County Jail in 2002, and my understanding is that he beefed with Indio. Let me know if that is correct. Charlie Playboy Brown Carba was from Longo, but also had ties to Oregon. He had an H number and was made MA sometime in the 1990s. He ended up being housed at Tehachapi at DVI, and I show was released in 2012. Ronald Bruiser Briseño was from Hawthorne, Ochentas. He ended up picking up a YA number in 1975, paroled in 76, got involved in counterfeiting in 1977, so was sent to the feds as an adult. He did time at Marion, and he even was housed at the federal facility in Chicago, where I understand a BGD insulted Joe Morgan, and Bruiser took care of that guy. He ended up being housed at the ADX in 2004 and was released in October 2015. Richard Cheeks Buchanan is from San Diego. He had a C number and was made MA in the 1980s. He ended up going down to Tijuana and working with Bat Marquez in moving dope for the Ariano Felix organization. Cheeks ended up going to the feds due to his actions, which locked up quite a few San Diego gang members. Harry Buckley Gamboa was half white, half Mexican. I believe he was from Maravilla, but may have been from Hawaiian Gardens. He was one of the first major drug connections for the Mexican Mafia in Tijuana and dealt dope directly with Joe Morgan. Harry Buckley had his office at a hotel in Rosarito, Mexico, and was involved in several homicides, including that of an individual named Robert Parral on August 21st, 1972. Harry was born in 1920, so I'm pretty sure has long been deceased. Francisco, a.k.a. Frankie B., a.k.a. Chivo Buelna, was actually from Merced, but then later on moved to the Rosemead area. Then later on moved to the Chino Hills area. He was made MA in the late 1960s and was involved in the shoe war against the West Familia and always involved in MA politics. Buelna was very cocky, and I remember my mentor, Robert Morel, telling me that one time he extorted a Paisa Mexican national family by holding a gun to the baby and telling them to show him where the drugs or the money was. This guy was cold-blooded. He ended up being involved in taxing Sureño gangs, and a lot of them protested. Finally, his office was actually out of a bar called Characters in Pomona, which I've been to a few times, and was actually in that bar the weekend before he was killed. The Sureños there from Pomona went from Mikey Lerma from Pomona 12th Street, as well as Dashing D. Daryl Castrione from Ontario Black Angels, and got the blessing to take him out. And so Frankie B is a key example of live by the sword, die by the sword. Salvador Buenrostro was from a barrio called Jardín. He ended up going into the youth authority in 1961 and got involved in the MA in the 1970s. He ended up doing a bank robbery in 1977 and was sent to the feds. He then came back to California where he got a D number. Evidently, he badmouthed Joe Morgan and was hit in the LA County Jail on July 16, 1991 by Topo Peters, one of Joe's major supporters, and Boxer Enriquez. Of course, after that, Buenrostro was done and ended up locking it up and then was later housed at Mule Creek State Prison. David Bugsy Burgos was from Orange County, Santa Ana. He had a B number and was made an MA member sometime in the 1970s. He was hit at New Folsom Seat Facility in January 1993 while I was still working there. He later ended up being housed at Richard J. Donovan. George Buckethead Bustamante, Aztec code name Teotzin, was made an MA member in the mid-1980s. He ended up being caught up on a RICO case and sent to the feds, where he was very active, communicating with Aryan Brotherhood members, as well as Mexican Mafia members. Buckethead ended up being involved in taxation of several barrios, but evidently bumped heads with some of the other canales, and so he was put in bad standings. His father, George Sr., was known as Grandpa, both being from Venice. Now, I have some people that tell me that Grandpa was not a member, but I have other people saying that he was. Once again, if he was not a member, he was a very, very close associate. I have documentation on this guy being involved with a lot of canales. I might have to do a special episode on the Bustamante family. Evidently, they did some deals with Armenians in Armenian power, and a lot of the Mexican Mafia guys was not cool about that. Robert Pretty Bob Bustillos was a longtime MA member from Colton. He first had an A number and was made an MA member sometime between the late 1960s and early 70s. He was noted as being a shot caller when he was at Tehachapi in 2001, but fell from grace by 2009. He ended up joining Victory Outreach with Kilroy and the boys, and as far as I know, is still alive. So that's it for the Bravo names for the Mexican Mafia. Like I said, if you want to know more on these individuals and others, there's a lot more information in my book, The History of the Mexican Mafia. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.
When you're